Hello there, Bruichladdich Whiskey Lore. Time for a matchup Monday, and today I am doing a matchup of some whiskeys that I got to match up actually at a bourbon event the other day. And it's not bourbon, but instead it is peated whiskey. So this is the old tried and true, heavily peated Port Charlotte 10-year-old. And so I had that there. Last year it was a big hit, but it was going up against Islay Barley 2012, I think, and also against Bruichladdich. So it didn't really have a smoky competitor. This year it did. This year I also was doing samplings for the VIPs to the group there, the 2014 version of Islay Barley. And the results frankly surprised me. I was expecting Port Charlotte, tried and true, 10-year to be the one that everybody jumped on board with. I was surprised to find that most people who I was introducing it to found this 7-year 2014 as something they preferred. So I'm going to go in and do a tasting today and kind of give you an idea of what the differences are between these two whiskeys. First and foremost is the price difference. We're going to talk probably about 65 to 70 a bottle for the 10-year, and this is going to probably run you up closer to the $85 to $90 range for the 2014. So the 10 is their flagship. It's made with Scottish barley, so it comes from inland Scotland, whereas the 2014 actually comes from 8 different farms on Islay. And so this is going to have a little bit more of an island character in terms of the barley, which is something that's interesting to taste when there isn't peat. What happens when there is peat? How much of a difference does it make? Both of these are 40 ppm, so ppm being parts per million of phenols. Phenols are a way that we use to describe how much peat smoke there is in the barley. Remember, that is peat smoke in the barley, not peat smoke in the final distillate. So when you distill, you can distill some of that out aggressively, and sometimes you can leave it in there where it is still interacting heavily with the whiskey. Another difference between these two bottles, the barrels that they use. So Port Charlotte, heavily peated, uses 3 different types of barrels. They're going to use 65% first fill American oak, which is bourbon. Not sure which bourbon distillery they get their barrels from. Then 10% is second fill. So the idea of a second fill American bourbon barrel is to give a little less impact from that barrel, kind of lighten things up a bit. And then 25% comes from a second fill French wine cask. Now that's a lot of French wine cask getting involved in this particular whiskey. On the other hand, the 2014, that has 84% first fill American, all right, first fill bourbon, they actually specify, 8% second fill virgin oak. Now, second fill virgin oak is kind of an interesting idea to me because honestly, if it's got to a second fill, is it still virgin oak? You know, that part I'm not quite sure about. So anyway, it was virgin oak the first time they filled it, meaning that it was toasted and potentially charred, and then it was filled with scotch most likely, and then they used it for a second fill for this. The idea being we're going to get some of those maybe aggressive notes from the charring and toasting of the barrel, but we don't necessarily want to overwhelm. Then 8% of a second fill Bordeaux cask. So again, they're going for a little wine cask influence on this whiskey, but very light on the 2014 versus the Port Charlotte 10, which is their flagship peated whiskey. Everything about it says that I'm thinking the novice is probably going to enjoy the 10 more than they're going to enjoy the 14. And the reason why I say that is because the 10 has more wine cask involved, it's been aged longer, and it has inland barley, which means it's not going to be affected by some of those island characteristics, where when I get pushback on peated whiskeys, the pushback is usually it's too medicinal. So, and that medicinal quality comes from the waters of the Atlantic and that iodine that is in the water in that area. So, all right, let's jump in and start. I'm going to start with the 10 and kind of give you a baseline of what I nose and taste here. So this has always been one of my favorites. To me, it has some really nice, like I get a little vinegary apple on it, but I think mostly what I get out of it is kind of that smoky note, maybe a little chocolate there in the background. I pick up a little bit of tar / shoe leather on this. I don't know if those really go together, but I kind of pick those up together. Kind of a dusty smoke, maybe some little bit of a, like I say, a chocolate note, hints of vanilla, and a little barbecue. So to me, it's got a lot of different things going on, but where it really knocks me out is on the palate. But before I jump into the palate on that one, I'm going to go to the 2014 and see what happens on the nose with this. And this, again, is a reason why this might shock me that the novices really enjoyed this whiskey. It is very earthy on the nose to me. And that shoe leather note, the reason I can pick it out now on the 10 is because it's very strong on this. The medicinal note is there. The smoky warehouse. I mean, it does sort of have a little bit of a campfire note to it. And a brininess that comes along with the chocolate note that is different. It is very different. Yeah, this is something that reminds me more of Ardbeg than it does Port Charlotte. Because to me, Ardbeg is more ashy. And to me, I pick up some ashiness on the nose on this particular whiskey. It's also a little bit more pungent on the nose. All right, let's jump over here to the 10 and do a quick tasting on it. Cheers. Nice silky mouthfeel to it. It's one of the things I really like about it. Apple, brininess, smoke, chocolate starts coming through. Oh, wow. Rhubarb. Get a little rhubarb on that. This is really interesting. The medicinal character is there as well. It's not aggressive. It's just there and it's nice. And on the finish, get a little of that brininess, get a little bit of that smoke. I'm not overwhelmed by the bourbon barrel, even though it's 84% of what's in here. I think in a way maybe it's giving it some of that body and character, but, or I'm sorry, not 84%, 65%. And maybe that little bit of fruit note coming through from the French wine, but it's not as aggressive in those notes as you might think it would be with that much. I was advising somebody the other day because she was talking about where she tastes on her tongue. And I said, don't forget the side and make sure to work the whiskey around the less worn area of your palate, which is on the sides of your tongue. You'll be amazed at some of the flavors that come through on that, and it really gives you a all-over experience. Now, some people swish, swish, swish. You know, Fred Noe with his Kentucky Chew, you know, making all sorts of noise and throwing it around. Look, your teeth aren't tasting it, you know. But maybe if some gets up and saturates into the sides of your cheeks and that sort of thing, you're going to get an overall experience. I just don't feel like being overly aggressive. It actually distracts me when I'm working the whiskey around the mouth a little bit too much. All right, let's jump on to the other. I do find tasting these close to each other kind of impairs a clean sense of things. Probably should have some crackers around or something to cleanse the palate. And the old sniff test there. Wow. No, I really honestly can't believe. Now here's the thing. When you go to one of these whiskey events, usually you're on your 30th whiskey by the time you come over to look at the scotch and say, okay, I'm going to give that a chance. So it's likely that maybe it wasn't a 100% awareness of what smells were in this. But this is so earthy. Wow. Cheers. Definitely lighter on the palate. I think what people like about this whiskey is that it is not aggressive. It's younger, yes. The only aggression in this really comes towards the end when there is a heat note. There's a pepperiness that comes in. I almost don't want to call it peppery, maybe gingery, but it's fairly strong. Not immediately, but it shows up. Then on the finish, you kind of get this nice little vanilla cookie thing going on. They call it digestives, which is what they call them over there because they used to have they used to be able to sell them as medicinal items, cookies, yes. Over here, not so much. We probably call them more like sugar cookies, although this isn't overly sweet. And then you get that pepper note. But I'm also picking up some tobacco notes that are coming through on this. Everything is subtle. There's a bit of ashiness to it. There's some fruit notes coming through. I really kind of pick up a melon note in this whiskey. Some orchard fruits coming in as well. It is interesting. But it's, as I say, milder. And I think that is what's happening is I get them to taste this first. Then they come over to this and they go, oh, that's much more mild. I like that. If I did this first and then went to this, I might find that I get a little bit different reaction. But interesting that I can really turn people on to Port Charlotte 10 by itself. But if I pair it up with this, then they're with this. And they say, no, not into the Port Charlotte 10. I think I actually still prefer the Port Charlotte 10 over the 2014, but that's just personal taste, and it's partially because of the nice mouthfeel to it. It really does feel like there is a silkiness in that whiskey, and that's part of what I really appreciate about it. I hope you enjoyed this today. By the way, I have tomorrow a little discussion about where the history or where whiskey lore is going in the future. I do want to give you a teaser here that I am going to now start doing a lot more on Patreon, and I have opened up a free level of Patreon. So if you're on Patreon, I urge you, if you're a fan of the videos here, the podcast, go ahead and sign up for a free account at least, and then if you feel like dipping in and supporting the show through one of our price tiers, I would greatly appreciate that. But I want to get everybody on board and get one place where I can really start feeding all of my content to. Because to be honest with you, I'm getting a little tired of feeding the beast of Instagram and Facebook, and I'm not going away from those, but I'm just not interested in fighting an algorithm. So at least with Patreon, you can see my posts, and they should come up for you to see as soon as I release things. Hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much, and until next time, cheers and Slainte. I will do a dedicated episode with this. It's just so interesting.